I think the most important thing is to have one story, like one true story, not one overly packaged, overthought story, but one that was very true, right? About, why you're stepping out again or what you've been learning in the background in the meantime. And again, maybe a little bit of vulnerability because that's very magnetic. People don't want a polished perfection, right? Like they want a reason to root for you.
Welcome to Moments That Inspire, the podcast that uncovers the power moves and hard truths behind leadership today. And I'm your host, Dolon Mitra. Here we explore how to build clarity of self, forge strong connections, and find the courage to create breakthroughs, all absolutely critical to being visible and valued. Through candid stories and hard earned lessons from remarkable voices, you'll gain insights to shape moments that define your career and help you make the power moves. In a world quick to label you, how do you really define yourself? And how do you ensure that others tell the story that you want them to say? Joining us today is Debbie Young, branding strategist and former journalist. She has spent over 15 plus years in helping leaders and organizations move from description to distinction and from image to influence. Welcome, Debbie. It's great to have you on Moments That Inspire.
Hi, Dolon. Thanks for having me as well. I loved your intro, so thank you very much.
Great. One of the common definition of branding always has been is that what people say about you when you leave the room. And that can either open doors or quietly shut doors forever. Very, very important to know. And we've seen organizations like Patagonia build billions of dollars a lot on branding their purpose rather than product per se, right? And at a personal level, we have seen leaders who have gone through transformation journey like you and a lot of other leaders creating the right brand can give them opportunities way beyond their job description. So let's start at the very beginning. What is the true definition of a brand and what are the very clear pillars or things that one needs to keep in mind when a person or organization is going about building his or their brand?
Great. Yeah, I think that there's so much to unpack there and would love to discuss this with you. I think it's exactly as you said, right? Your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room, which for me is really the impact and it's also the authenticity, whether what you were trying to convey links to the impression and the impact that you actually truly left. And for me, this is all really strategic. I think in today's digital age, you can manage the narrative. I think back then, back before, the internet, before social media, like if you were a business, you would pitch your story to, say, a journalist like me. You would, deliver all your talking points and hope and pray really hard that the journalist picks up on all the talking points and reflects it exactly as you meant to convey it. And maybe not all the time it works, right? Maybe the journalist goes off and realizes, actually, this point that you did mention, that was the most interesting. And then, the story becomes a whole different thing. But today, you can tell your stories directly. There's so many platforms too, right? Whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's your own social media accounts, whether it's going on podcasts like this one to tell your story, whether it's speaking on stage. So all the more you have to be intentional and strategic about it. Don't leave it to chance. Don't let someone Google something that you left behind from 5 years ago and form that impression of you based on something you didn't mean to say. So that's the first thing I always start with. It's intention, right? To make it easier for people to understand, I've come up with this framework that I call the 5 V's framework. So it's vision, values, your voters, your voice, and the visibility. And I'll go into each one of that, right? So we start with vision, right? Your vision is your why, right? Like it's not just what you're doing today, but where you're headed to tomorrow. And that's your North Star, and it doesn't change. Even when the path diverges, the direction should stay the same. And I think the clearest visions are both bold and they're also human. They make people want to not just watch you and observe you, but want to join in your movement. And I think a brand without a vision can get easily distracted and chase the next, shiny object, the latest trend, instead of really shaping them with conviction. So that's the first one. The second one is your values. So your values are your how, right? What are the values you stand on when the ground is shifting beneath you? And we're in the age of exactly that, right? There's so much uncertainty, and the only thing that is a constant should be your values. And sit down, ask yourself, like, what is the common thread that goes through all the work that you've done and how you have done it, and really hold on tight to that. Without values, then I think visibility becomes performance, and it becomes inauthentic. So I think it's from the way you like treat your team to how you handle failure. These are touch points that can really reveal your values. And for brands and leaders, I always say, don't just state them, but show them, because also the downside of the digital age is that people can easily call it out. Like, it's easy to for people to see an inauthentic side of you. So that's the second one. And then the third is what I call voters. Really, I wanted to have a V to fit in this structure, but it's really your target audience, right? Like, who are you reaching out to? And I like the word voters because it's how do you serve them? It's not just people that you want. It's not followers. Like, you're really fighting for, like a politician, you're fighting for every vote out there, right? Like, if you're in business, you're fighting for the consumer dollar. They could give it to your competitor. So why you? It's about the people that you want to impact and whose trust and attention that, you need to win over. And I think in branding, like in politics, right, true legitimacy comes from the people that you serve and uplift as well. And then the fourth one is voice. So how you express yourself and connect. And I think that's, what makes you stand out. Like, there are a lot of branding and personal branding strategies, but like, how do you speak differently from your own experience? How does your past and your history and your experience shape the voice that you have? Are you supportive? Are you collaborative? Are you more authoritative? Two people can say the same thing, but one will be remembered because of voice. I think, and a true voice is consistent, but it's not stiff. Like, it can adapt to different contexts while staying recognizable. It's not just what you say, but also how people feel when you hear it. And the last one is visibility. It's really identifying which platforms you want to show up on, which platforms your audience is on, so that you prioritize the channels that you want to show up on. So it's about showing up in the right places at the right time for the right reasons, and really focusing your efforts, because it's a noisy world that we're out there. So
Right.
without visibility or misaligned visibility, even the most compelling brands with the best stories can fade into the background. And I always say it's less about true visibility, is less about volume and more about trust, right? So being present long enough for people to believe it when you mean it. Yeah, so I think whether you're a Fortune 500 company or a solopreneur, I think the strongest brands are aligned in these five dimensions, and that's how you feel authentic and intentional and not just performative.
Few things which you mentioned, which really made a lot of sense. And if you could just help me unpack that. So, for example, one thing which becomes very difficult to understand is this concept of values, as you said. People understand, okay, this is my market, this is my target audience that I'm going to go after. But how do I really keep my values also as a guiding principle, which adds to my brand? Is there anything specific that you can help our audience with?
I think that's interesting. Yeah, values are very intangible and they're very hard to, you can't just pluck them out of thin air, right? A lot of it comes from, I think, past behaviors. And what I always recommend is really sitting with yourself. And
Mm.
I draw this a lot from my own journey as well. Initially, at the start of my transition, I would have coffee with a lot of people and ask them, hey, what do like typical management, books, right? They would say, talk to your friends and ask them talk to your friends, your clients, your colleagues, and ask them, like, what are your strengths? So I did that, right? And then you get different answers, and everyone says different things because they see different aspects of you in different contexts. And then it gets really confusing. But I think to really discover your values is to just shut out all the noise, right? And then sit with yourself and also look back at your past experiences and how you handled difficult situations, how you handled positive situations, how you handle difficult staff, for example, right? How you celebrated in moments of joy. And what is the through line of all of that in your behavior? And I think that's how you distill your values and then have clarity around them. And you don't need to, for the purposes, I think, of branding, you don't need to have like 10 values, right? Because that gets really confusing. So I think it's identifying about 3 to 4 core values that align with your leadership, if you're building a personal brand and that's what you want to convey, or with your business purpose, like why your company exists or your business service and product.
Now, because your framework is so fascinating, I'm just sticking to one last point of it. The first one, as you said, North Star. There are lots of people who are into transitions at this point in time from their corporate career, which was very straight-jacketed, straight one line. After one level, you're going to the other, you have clear job descriptions, etc., etc. But the moment you're moving out and you're moving into a gig or a fractional economy, a lot depends on your North Star, what you want to do, right? But it's very easy said than done. For example, for me, I've always been in HR. So naturally, the things which come to me that I can do training, I can do compensation, I can do performance management, etc., etc. But what is my North Star? What is it that I'm really passionate about, which if I do, I'm going to really be able to create an impact? How does one cross that hump?
Yeah, I think it's not an easy question. I think it's really starting with why you want to be seen, and what is the ultimate impact that you want to leave behind. And I find a useful exercise for this. It's not original. I didn't come up with it. It's the deathbed exercise. Sorry to be
Right.
morbid, right? But like on your deathbed or like in your obituary, what do you want at the memorial service? What do you want people to say about you? Like, what are your kids gonna say about you? Who's gonna show up? I think when you think about that, kind of like the deathbed last meal exercise, when you confront your morbidity, your mortality, then you really realize that with the limited time that we have on Earth, like, where are you gonna concentrate your efforts in a way that will leave an impact, right? Like, so, the Excel sheet that you're fumbling over, where does that stand in the bigger picture? Yeah, so I find that actually a really, really useful exercise. Yeah.
That was very liberating, actually, Debbie. If you ask me, you said that it was morose, but if one thinks like that, what are the things that I want to be remembered for? Life becomes very crystal clear. And
Yeah.
once that clarity comes, you can literally start focusing on those and not focus on the things which is really not adding too much of the joy that you're talking about. That was really profound. Thanks for that. So now moving on, one of the biggest traps that leaders fall into nowadays, specifically with LinkedIn and all the social media, is that constantly the need to push out content for visibility, right? And visibility should not be about volume. It's about showing up with conviction. And as you mentioned, stories, knowing which part of your stories matter and which part of your stories to really put forward. So, what can listeners today use to distill their own brand so that they know what actually needs to show up online or show up wherever they want to, and what are the things that does not need to show up? And I know, I mean, maybe you have another model called sticky, which you had spoken to. You can talk about that, or any other way you want to reframe this. So everybody has lots of things to say. What is the way to distill the things that they actually need to project online so that they are remembered for the right things rather than putting everything up?
Yeah. So I think with that, yes, I agree with you. There's a lot of noise online already, a lot of people talking about themselves, some in a very interesting way, some in a very cringe way. And I
Right.
think that has been, that holds a lot of leaders back, particularly I think Asian leaders, in our culture where we're taught not to brag, not to even humble brag. The work will speak for itself. So yes, there's a lot of inertia to get over. But I always tell, my friends or my clients who want to start and just feel like the ick is to reframe it as a service, right? Like, your visibility is not for yourself. It's not an ego exercise. It's if you can use your experiences, particularly your failures, to help somebody else avoid that failure, to become a better version of themselves, then you have not failed in vain, right? And then you learn, everybody learns with you. And so if you reframe that, then your visibility as a service, then again it goes back to the 5 V's. Who do you want to impact? Who can you impact the most with your experiences? And what do they need to hear, right? So it's not just me getting on a pedestal talking about my, childhood victories or my childhood trauma. It's how does that my overcoming my childhood obstacle maybe help someone who is currently a youth facing the same thing, right? If that's my target audience, or who maybe was a peer who maybe had faced the same thing because we're from the same social circles, but she never, voiced out that challenge. So how can I impact, again, talking about service, right? How can I impact that person? And when you start thinking about your audience rather than yourself, then it takes away the self-aggrandizing, right? And then you think more about the takeaway. Like, what is the takeaway here that you really want people to leave with? And then it becomes a lot more useful. And on that note, also, I always talk about I think there's a lot of people putting their success stories out there, but I think there's a lot of value in vulnerability, but I say strategic vulnerability. So you're not like putting every failure, sob story, childhood trauma out there. It's a hero's journey, right? Like the dip. But then like and then what? The learning. Like what is the takeaway here? Doesn't have to be I fail and then here's my success and all I want to talk about is this success, look how great I am. But it's the journey that I think a lot of people want to hear, that they will resonate with. And that's where you find fellow journeymen who want to support you. And that's what I found in my own journey. And I think it's so purpose when you have purpose to it, when you have audience centricity, then it isn't just about volume and noise and producing and being seen all the time on every platform, but it's about finding resonance, like what you're sharing, can really speak to somebody, or can really speak to somebody who sees a commonality between both your stories. And that is the trust building and not just presence.
Amazing. I thought you had already given me the sentence for the episode, but for me, the sentence of the episode now, halfway through, is this: reframe everything that as if it's a service. It's a super powerful sentence, and just that one sentence can give you a lot of clarity in how you are really going to position yourself or your services.
Great to hear. I'm glad to be of service.
Absolutely. So now moving on, a brand is also very importantly about reinventions. You work extensively with the food industry where image, identity, status is everything, and it can be made or broken in an instant, right? So what is that one brand reality that stays out for you? For number one is getting it very correct consistently year on year. That's one. And second is if there's any brand which really hit rock bottom and then very successfully reinvented itself.
Okay, yeah. I think those are, yeah, very interesting questions. In the food industry, I think I'll maybe speak about personal brand. A very influential leader I've been following is Will Guidara. So he was a restaurateur. He was the co-founder of 11 Madison Park. He left the restaurant, and I think he's done a really successful, 11 Madison Park, award-winning, right? Everyone knows them, fine dining, like leader of the industry. And then he left the restaurant. And I think it's what he did after that that really sealed his legacy. He's transformed himself into a thought leader on hospitality. So he wrote this book called Unreasonable Hospitality, talking about how they approached service when they were at 11 Madison Park. But this brand, Unreasonable Hospitality, that he's since taken, this notion of unreasonable hospitality that he coined, he's really turned into a brand for himself as well as a standalone brand. So today he's a global keynote speaker, commanding fees of more than 5,000 US dollars, talking about unreasonable hospitality. He consults for businesses, not just in the F&B industry, about the importance of service or service mindset within, leadership and organizations. He also organizes the Unreasonable Hospitality Conference and now has spun off a Welcome Conference, which is a cross-sector conference talking about excellence in leadership. And he's recently, and his influence, I feel, has transcended formats, right? Like he's recently started a newsletter on LinkedIn just a couple of weeks ago. If you're in the hospitality industry, highly recommend you follow it. So many good insights. But within weeks, he's now up to like 45,000 subscribers. So people follow him regardless of platform, regardless of format, regardless of whether it's an event, whether it's a book. So I think he's really an example to look to for someone who has built a brand that can take different forms, but the core is the same, which is the idea about the transformative power of service and this notion of unreasonable hospitality.
Now, moving on, as you rightly said, moving with times, right? So now we know that with tools like ChatGPT, Canva, Brand Yourself, they do so much of heavy lifting for you already, right? And there are so many sessions on how to crack the LinkedIn algorithm, etc., etc. So the question for you is, I mean, I'm all for using AI, absolutely. So
Mm.
how does people who are listening today literally leverage all the AI tools which are available to really sharpen their content? However, also keep the guardrails that they are not becoming a part of the echo.
Yes. Yes, I agree. It's so easy to churn, right? AI is really good at just churning. I like to use AI actually as a devil's advocate. Like I will ask AI, like, do you think this post sounds too braggy or too humble braggy? Or like tell me what readers might criticize in this post. Right. But AI is always really polite, and that's the problem. AI is an echo chamber. Like they never tell you you're wrong. They're always like, yeah, it's great, it's fantastic, da 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 da, and it's the but that you should listen to. So I'm always like criticize this, like, oh, where can I improve this? Like, what can I do better? What will people say about it? Like, what negativity will come from this? Just as a filter, not to like, you don't have to please everyone. That's what I always say, right? Like, once you know your target audience, yes, you will have detractors, but if you identify that they are not within your target audience, then they can say whatever because you know what, you're not my people. That's okay. Like, you're entitled to your opinion. But yeah, just to have a bit of a filter, like I like to use AI for that. Also for brainstorming, AI can churn out like a million topic ideas, but don't take it at face value, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
always, either I pick and choose the best ones, I edit it, or I say, not good enough, or can we integrate these two? So really, it's a brainstorming partner rather than it shouldn't take the lead, right? It should just be a sounding board, I feel. The power of LinkedIn is yes, it's in the ability to reach people, but it's also in the ability to have these deep conversations in DMs with people that you didn't realize were silently following you or resonating with what you put out there. So yeah, don't be discouraged even when it's crickets because it just takes one. If you connect with one person, it's already worth sharing your story.
No, that really resonates, Debbie. And the first point that you mentioned, using AI as a devil's advocate, that's something that I had never done. And I think that's something that I'm definitely going to take back with me after this conversation. I'm sure all the listeners would also. We always ask, make it better, give it this angle, give this chance. But at least I have never personally asked that, okay, fine, dig holes as many as can from this particular content. And I think that's lovely. I really love this angle of DM also because you rightly said, I mean, lots of people, oh, I put in so much of effort. There was so many things, but there were only 15 interactions over there. But I think the impressions, as you meant, and the engagement and the DMs which are coming out of it, I think that's also something that we need to equally look upon rather than just the followers or whatever you may have. That was
100%. And sometimes it doesn't come immediately, right? Like I get contacted for like, to go on a documentary like months after a post that I put out about, the future of food, for example. So you never know the impact you're making.
Now, let me move to a very specific topic, which is career transitions. And a lot of people that we are talking about here, number one is going through a transition or preparing for a transition in whatever way. And it's not just that job cut or whatever. I want to live a way more fulfilled life. A lot of people are going through this transition, and it may actually feel starting from the shadows again. What I really want to ask you is, what are some of the most boldest and most effective steps that one can take to re-enter the world with credibility, to re-enter the world with strong foundation of a brand, rekindle their brand and start from there when someone is going through this entire process of transition or transformation?
I think the important thing when you want to step out again is don't stress about having the full rebrand ready.
Mm.
Like, yes, I have the frameworks and all that. And yes, you should do some of the inner work first, like of who you are, how you do things, what's your why. But you don't need the shiny outward package. You need the clarity inside, but you don't need like the full website. You don't need like the glossy photo shoot. I think the most important thing is to have one story, like one true story, not one overly packaged, overthought story, but one that was very true, right? About, why you're stepping out again or what you've been learning in the background in the meantime. And again, maybe a little bit of vulnerability because that's very magnetic. People don't want a polished perfection, right? Like they want a reason to root for you. And so when you step out with this honesty, you don't just announce that you're back. You invite people to walk with you and build with you, and like showing the messy middle, and everyone loves rooting for an underdog, right? Rather than oh, look at me, I'm like perfect, I figured this all out and now I'm just going to talk at you. It's a no, like come with me, like I'm still figuring this out, I want your advice. And yeah, people I found have been extremely kind, especially on LinkedIn. I think it's one of the kindest social networks out there. There's so much help that, if you learn to ask for it, you will receive it in like bounds. Yeah.
So, if I may go and ask you, so Debbie, I mean, I love the fact that you said find that one true story and follow that with all your heart. So, what was your one, that true story which you found and then you really followed that with heart?
Yeah, so I think my sort of re-debut on LinkedIn was just my frustration with finding another job. And I just said, I'm done with finding a job. Like, I was secretly applying because I didn't want people to think that I was struggling to find the next role, right? Because I just come from like a really, a role that everyone wanted and it was very
Right.
cushy. And I didn't want to seem like, oh, I don't know what's next. So I was like quietly sending out resumes and getting rejections. And like, and the rejections just spiral, right? Like sending out resumes to companies I didn't even want to work for, and then they rejected me, and I was like, "Wait, I don't even want you, and you don't want me." So I basically said, "I'm done with it. Like, I'm just going to attract. I'm not going to ask anymore. I'm going to say, this is who I am. This is what I'm looking for. At the time, I was still looking for a job, actually, to be very honest, when I, started to try and build a public profile again. I was like, these are my criteria. I'm going to hold fast to this criteria. And if you suit me, then I'm going to reconsider going back into a corporate role. Obviously, I haven't found someone who met all my criteria, so now I'm doing my own thing. And that's completely fine, right? And it was a journey that I got to saying, you know what, like I haven't found anything, I'm just gonna do my own thing. And that's why a lot of people are like, I think it resonates with a lot of people. And so even now when I say I'm running my own consultancy, people say, I'm rooting for you, like I want to be your client, like what do you do? I will sign up. Even when I didn't have my my service packages ready and I didn't even have a website, they were just like, I want to support you. And I think that really is the power of just saying, still figuring this out, help me figure it out. And yeah, and just sharing that story of struggle as well. Yeah.
And that really brings forward the statement that you made, that give them a reason to root for you. And I think these vulnerabilities, which you're confident enough to share, because you know that this is transient. I have been super successful. I will be in future also. These are my transient vulnerabilities. If you're confident enough to share that, then you get enough and more number of people who actually root for you. I mean, invested in your own growth, as you rightly mentioned. They said, I want to come with you. Please, you prepare your services fast so that I can really come and work with you. That is so powerful. So I know we are also running out of time. So the last question, if you could just help us with, we are also we are talking about creating anchors and long term, etc., etc. We are also in a world where memory is very, very short lived and even becoming shorter, whether we like it or not.
Mm.
So, and brands are trying their level best to keep pace. And I'm not talking about big organizations who have big buildings and big functions to helping them with their marketing. I'm
Mm.
talking about these individuals that we were just talking about, like you, like me, like so many other people that we have. So, what would be the smartest ways for leaders to move at speed of attention, right? But still not fall prey to this unnecessary cycle and also really stay true to themselves. However, continue with the momentum where people do not forget. Because believe me, I think a month of no communication, it's like, okay, you have to start your story all over again. So, how does one really balance between this need for speed and trying to really play the ace game?
Yeah, thanks for this question. And I think it really speaks to me because the clients that I usually work with are exactly like 10-year-old brands, and I find they are in this spot where they've achieved success, they built all the credibility, but they're not the hottest ticket in town anymore, right? There's so many young upstarts, and because they've built so much success, the pivots have a much higher risk, right? They don't want to lose everything overnight, but they know that they need to reinvent. So it's exactly an issue I deal with in all my conversations with my clients. This idea of longevity versus reinvention. I think that, longevity is really about not chasing every trend, but also not staying frozen in time. And maybe an analogy I like to use is think about like a restaurant menu, and there are signature dishes that are always there, right? Like you come back for, you bring your family back for, you tell all your friends about, and they cannot. Well, and they don't change. These are the signature dishes anchor the brand. But then you have the seasonal specials, the promotional ones, right? The ones that can be a little bit trendier. And I think brands that have a strong, I think brands that last need to have clarity over the strong core identity and then also build a rhythm of reinvention. For example, I think, maybe one example I've worked on recently is this restaurant. It was called Rhubarb. It had a Michelin star for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Fine dining. British chef Paul Longworth, who's a great guy, but the market's shifted, right? People don't want to sit in 4-hour dinners anymore and pay like
Mm-hmm.
$300. Although he was much cheaper than that. He was very affordable. So he recently rebranded, and we went through a brand identity process. So now he's called Encore by Rhubarb, anchored on the idea that he wanted to be a place that people return to again and again. And it was also his next act, so it's like an encore. And so in that process, it was what is true to him. And Paul, if you know him, he's a very, very low-key chef. Doesn't do media interviews. When he got his star, like other chefs were going on TV and all of that. He didn't do all of that. He just stayed in the kitchen, cooked, and served his guests. And so we made that his core identity because that really is who he is, right? We're not slapping some PR fancy image on him. The quiet confidence is the core, right? It's in the way he handles press and publicity. It's in the way he cooks. It's so confident that you don't need to shave truffle and put uni and caviar all at the same time, right? So he's cooked for decades, and unlike a lot of the younger chefs, he has nothing to prove. Right? He
Right.
doesn't need to impress you with all these frills. So that core identity can then be translated, whether it's a fine dining, whether it's a more casual restaurant that he now runs. So that I think it's the authenticity. The longevity comes from the authenticity of knowing who you are, and then also finding a cadence for the reinvention, right? Like,
Mm.
is it every week you're launching a new special, which is a bit too noisy? Is it every month, every year? And I think you need to maybe set a regular cadence to revisit your story. What's the chapter now? Which parts stay consistent and what can be refreshed? And I think a brand that can last for 10 years or more is the one that can identify first and then honor your DNA, but still constantly surprise your audience. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the last word that you use, surprise, because that interest and that excitement also needs to stay for a little while for people to continue coming back to your brand and to your name or to whatever it is. So, Debbie, from cutting through the noise to reinventing at rock bottom to redesigning for the long game, I think you've shown us that branding is really a choice. Either we let others define ourselves or we step up and shape the narrative that we want others to say about us. So let me leave our listeners with this question. When the echo fades, what story about you will still be told in those rooms? So on that, any last thoughts, Debbie?